Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Hope everybody's having a lovely day and Friday. Hope you have nice weekend plans. This is actually not live, recording this earlier because I got something to do during the normal live stream time. But we got a great show for you. We have an interview with a longtime railroad worker on what could become an unprecedented strike of 100,000 railroad workers, which potentially could happen in a month. So we're going to talk to Ron, who is a longtime railroad worker, about the just insane situation where railroad workers, their attendance policy or attendance requirement is out of control all over the country. They barely get days off. The proposed pay increases is a joke. That doesn't even match inflation. So we have that interview. We also are going to air some other interviews I did for my last reporting trip. If you recall, I recently went to Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia. So we're going to air some of that we haven't aired yet. And it's going to be a great stream. So don't go anywhere. Smash that like button. Share this live stream. The more people that smash the like button, the more people that will see this stream. Very important. Super chats are welcome. I can't read it later because I'm recording, but we appreciate your super chats. So please, if you can contribute, you'll see this on the ground reporting that we're going to air during this stream. We could only fund it because of you. So please, super chats are appreciated. Smash that like button, all that good stuff. I want to start. We cover a lot of the Democratic Party's corruption here. We are not like rah resistance, right? We cover Biden very critically. I just ranted yesterday about Pramila Jayapal and her saluting, Joe Manchin, calling him part of the Democratic Party family because he hijacked the Build Back Better bill, killed the child tax credit, then, basically demanded favors for his fossil fuel donors as part of this Inflation Reduction Act. So we do plenty of criticism of the Democratic Party and will continue. However, I don't think enough channels are highlighting, I don't know what you call it other than the explosion in violent right-wing extremism in this country. And obviously, Tina Desiree Berg, who freelances for us. She premiered her show yesterday on Status Coup. She's going to have a weekly show, The Right Wing Insanity Report. Definitely check out her show. It's up on the channel. Her first episode was yesterday. She interviewed a journalist who was attacked by anti-maskers. So definitely watch that. But I don't think enough leftist channels. Sure, they cover right-wing insanity and, the dumb, stupid things Republicans do. But I don't think enough channels and people are really highlighting the disturbing trend of just loony, extremist, racist, bigoted right-wingers that are just straight up calling for violence and running for office. I just thought, let's start the show by highlighting just in the last 48 hours, some really disturbing things, which again, this trend of candidates and politicians basically not even hiding it. It's not dog whistles anymore. They're just blaring the sirens. It's going to lead to violence. It's going to lead to political violence. This doesn't mean like, hey, rah, Democrats, but the Democrats are not, we have to call a spade a spade. They are not the ones directly calling for violence. This is the Republican Party now. And a lot of this got worse with Trump as president. We saw a real increase in right-wing violence, hate crimes. But even since he left, it has gotten worse. And now, obviously, after the raid on Mar-a-Lago, it has gotten worse. I want to show you first, obviously, there's been a lot of debate in leftist circles about Twitter censorship, social media censorship. I'm not for censorship. I have always said, short of somebody directly calling for violence, I think you have to allow even hateful people to remain on the internet, because when you start removing the hateful people, eventually they're going to come for us. And that's what has happened, where, you know, in the spirit of removing Alex Jones, they have removed a lot of leftists too, under bogus claims. But here, Twitter has suspended Florida Republican State House. So a candidate for the Florida House of Representatives. Twitter suspended Florida Republican State House candidate Luis Miguel after he advocates shooting federal agents. This is what he tweeted. Under my plan, all Floridians will have permission to shoot FBI, IRS, ATF, and all other feds on site. Let freedom ring. Luis Miguel, Republican for Florida House. I mean, I don't really, I don't really have words. I mean, what do you say to that? I totally for Twitter suspending him. I don't think he should be allowed on any platform. He's directly running on, hey, vote for me. I'll hand you the AR-15 to go after the FBI. And this isn't about liking the FBI. Of course, I'm not cheering for the FBI. I'm not like celebrating the FBI. If it were up to me, we'd have no FBI and abolish the damn thing. But you have Republican candidates that basically feel they have a green light to just straight up call for people to start shooting. What the hell do you think is going to happen? We've already just seen after the Mar-a-Lago raid, a lunatic attacked the FBI in Cincinnati. A man in Pennsylvania was just arrested a week ago. Online threats to slaughter the FBI. I mean, there's more and more direct threats happening, not just the FBI, politicians. You don't have to love politicians. I think every last one of them is corrupt, but you don't defeat the corruption through violence. You defeat corruption. You defeat politicians that are selling you out through organizing, through ideas, through tenacious protest, not through bullets, not through violence. I also want to show you, I played this yesterday, but if you didn't see it, this is a Minnesota state Senate candidate at a recent event. Let's hear what he's running on.
You've got to never, ever, ever forget the kind of damage the Viceroy up at the House did to this nice patch of land, small town Minnesota, and we need to grow our teeth back fast. So part of those teeth in this particular set of terms is voting with a ballot before we have to vote with bullets. Because at the end of the day, when people don't believe that their elections are stable, they don't believe that police can protect them, they stop using the democratic, of any kind of method. We are a democratically elected constitutional republic, for anybody confused by that. But like, people stop using that particular method when it looks like it's too corrupt to work. If it's too corrupt to work, nobody wants to participate. Who wants to participate in a game that seems like you're just going to lose it? And so we have to bring back that faith, and we have to come out and vote. We have to vote just like they're throwing Molotovs.
So this is someone who is running for Minnesota State Senate, and he's talking about we got to get our teeth back instead of, and if voting with the ballot doesn't work, we'll have to vote with bullets. And please smash that like button, share this live stream. The more people that press like, the more people that will see the live stream. So very important. Smash that like button, share this stream. Super chats are welcome. You know, I've covered Trump, both campaigns, 2016 and 2020. And for those status quoers who have been with me for a while, you remember during 2020, I was telling you, I'm seeing something different out of these Trump rallies now. Sure, 2016, there was a lot of kooky, crazy stuff that happened at Trump rallies. Sure, there was some aggressive Trump supporters, but I didn't see as many like white supremacist groups in 2016 as I was in 2020. I didn't see people with like the "Don't Tread on Me" as much, you know, on their cars, you know, white supremacist logos, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, that kind of thing. 2020, at some of these Trump rallies, you could feel it. I mean, it was really just from different white supremacist groups that were there to kooky conspiracy type peoples handing out weird buttons or things like that. Just to the things Trump was saying, how his supporters they were almost like a pack of hyenas chomping at the bit, particularly when he talked about going after our enemies and things like that. And I feel like what I was starting to see, kind of that evolution from Trump 2016 to 2020, which became a lot darker and a lot more violent in the rhetoric. I feel we're starting to see that as a domino effect down ballot, where between Trump and then January 6th, obviously, and the spineless Republican Party that kind of gave Trump a slap on the wrist directly after January 6th, but then went back to kissing his ass and, combing his toupee. We're starting to see it where straight up just violent, conspiratorial, militia types are running for office, calling for shooting the FBI, or if voting doesn't work, we'll vote with our bullets. This is scary shit. And again, this is not like me endorsing Democrats and vote blue no matter who to keep these people out. You do what you want. You vote for whoever you want. Democrat, Republican, third party, don't vote. This is not for me to tell you who to vote for. And we're going to continue covering Democrats critically. This isn't like, hey, let's pivot to covering Republicans 24/7. No, but you cannot ignore what's happening in this country. You cannot ignore the growing level of straight up fascism. What you're seeing is how fascism starts. And I've seen fascism on the road. And fascism isn't just like, what we think of in terms of white supremacy, autocrats, dictators. You got corporate fascism, which I saw at Standing Rock. I was out there covering the protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline, and you had the police working with an oil company to brutalize the people. That's fascism too. But this is a different type of fascism, and I believe it's going to lead to more and more violence, politically motivated violence in this country. And it's not just people straight up, calling for bullets either. I mean, just take a look at this. Oklahoma State Senate candidate Jaron Jackson, who says Jews will go to hell. I'm not beholden to Jews or any other group, and I ain't owned by the Jews. He just announced an endorsement yesterday from Kari Lake, who is the Republican governor's candidate in Arizona, who just won the nomination off of, promoting Trump's nonsense, bullshit claims about the election. So she's a full-on Trumper, election denier. And she just endorsed an Oklahoma State Senate candidate who's saying Jews will go to hell, and I'm not beholden to Jews or any other group. It's just crazy. I'm honored to be endorsed by the America First and Trump-endorsed warrior who drained the McCain swamp in Arizona and is now the GOP nominee for governor in Arizona, Kari Lake. She's a rising star, and her endorsement is a big deal. It's just crazy. An America First patriot. Well, I think fascism is a term used too often, but I'm using it. And then you have the usual suspects. If you don't know, basically the Republican Party has gone from, being bigoted against gay people to now in Texas, the governor has been trying to criminalize parents of transgender kids, to now they're straight up saying we're trying to make it illegal for transgender youth to have gender affirming procedures. Libs of TikTok, which is basically like a hate account that goes after gay folks, gay people all day, now transgender people. People like Glenn Greenwald has defended Libs of TikTok. Libs of TikTok, who I believe was recently suspended for doing some of this from one of the social media platforms. She put out a lie recently that Boston Children's Hospital was doing hysterectomies on young transgender youth. Let me repeat. Libs of TikTok put out Libs of TikTok put out that Boston Children's Hospital that does, that treated patients of the Boston Marathon bombing, gives free care to children. She put out a bunch of nonsense that Boston Children's Hospital was doing hysterectomies. Let me find it for you. On August 11th, Libs of TikTok's Twitter, run by Brooklyn real estate agent Kaya Reichik, posted a video clip from Boston Children's Hospital about gender-affirming hysterectomies, or the removal of the uterus, cervix, and fallopian tubes, and claimed that the institution was offering these procedures to young girls. The account followed its initial allegation up with more than a dozen inflammatory tweets and retweets that name-checked the hospital and accused it of mutilating children. In a Tuesday newsletter, Libs of TikTok fumed that the hospital, quote, supports castrating kids, and I have evidence, adding that it, quote, had a full menu of castration and mutilation options for minors to choose from. Quote, all this came to light last week, the author continued, quote, so I helped spread the horrors of what doctors are doing. The account's claims are swiftly debunked by fact-checking groups, including PolitiFact and Lead Stories, which pointed out that nowhere in the initial 33-second video did the Boston Children's Hospital suggest that the procedure is offered to children and that the program requires patients to be 18 years old or above to consent to hysterectomy. So Libs of TikTok is putting out false bullshit that Boston Children's Hospital is removing young teenagers' uterus, when those procedures, those gender-affirming care procedures, are for people 18 or older. And who pushed this also? None other than Tucker Carlson, of course. Tucker Carlson ran with this. And now Tucker Carlson is having his BFF, Marjorie Taylor Greene, on to push a law to ban gender-affirming care, to make it illegal in America.
Is the sexual mutilation of children, the sterilization of children, legal? No one in the Congress seems to be asking that. No one did until Marjorie Taylor Greene decided this is worth legislating. She represents Georgia in the U.S. Congress. She joins us with an announcement about new legislation pending. Congresswoman, thanks so much for coming on. So what do you plan to do about this?
Well, I find this absolutely appalling, Tucker. And, the whole reason why I ran for Congress in the first place is because I'm one of the Americans that are sick and tired of our government allowing the abuse of the American people. But when it comes to gender-affirming care, which is really child abuse, this is actually an assault and it's child abuse. And this practice should never happen. It's so disgusting and appalling, and it's an embarrassment to our country. You see, I'm one of those that believes the Republican Party is only worth being a true party, worth deserving of the people's votes, if we are willing to stand up and stop horrific things like child abuse and like so-called gender-affirming care, which is really genital mutilation. It's puberty blockers that cause chemical castration, teenage girls actually having their breasts chopped off, teenage boys being castrated. This needs to be illegal, and I'm introducing a bill called Protect Children's Innocence Act, and it would create a law that would cause it to be a Class C felony for any person involved in so-called gender-affirming care. That means genital mutilation surgery, that means hormones, that means puberty blockers, anything involving any youth under the age of 18, because these kids are too young to make these awful decisions.
Yes, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson and all of their ilk are so consumed with child abuse. Well, you know what's child abuse? I'll tell you what's child abuse. The fact that millions of children are hungry in this country, and the Republican Party, with their pal Joe Manchin, voted against the child tax credit. The child tax credit that was actually helping child poverty, was actually limiting and reducing child hunger. That's child abuse. Marjorie Taylor Greene's fine with that. Tucker Carlson, totally fine with that. You know what's child abuse? Children not having health care in America. Does the Republican Party give a shit about that? Of course not. Does the Democratic Party give a shit about that? Hell no. Does Tucker Carlson give a shit about that? Hell no. Oh, these Republicans. Oh, big government. We need to drown government, into this. We need to reduce government into the size that we could drain it in the bathtub. But let me get involved with the decisions made within families, between parents and teenagers. Nobody's talking about, hey, allow an 8-year-old to get permanent surgery to change or transition into another gender. But who the hell is Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, to be telling, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds who, obviously with their parents have made a decision to get gender affirming care? This is the biggest problem in America? Of course it's not a problem. But the Republican Party, as it continues to screw you economically, because Tucker Carlson is fine with screwing you economically. Don't listen to these fucking lunatics and ridiculous people who say, oh, he's a right-wing populist. No, he's not. He's never known a tax cut for wealthy people and corporations he's never loved. Same thing with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Who are they to be dictating to parents and their children what they can and cannot do with their bodies? I've met transgender youth. I've met them in St. Louis. I've met them in Florida. And in some cases, gender affirming care, transitioning, getting surgeries, puberty blockers, et cetera, actually made them feel alive for the first time, actually made them comfortable in who they are for the first time. But the Republicans are weaponizing this issue, which also is going to increase violence against transgender youth so that they can distract their base, so that they can juice up their base into a frenzy. And leftists continue to act like Tucker Carlson is somehow a friend of ours, and he's with us on certain issues. No, he's not. He's a bigot. He's a white supremacist. The New York Times did a report. He pushed the anti-Semitic Great Replacement theory over 400 times on his show on Fox News. And now he's hosting Marjorie Taylor Greene to Jones up and hysteria over youth mutilation. When the Republican Party pushes for Medicare for all, when the Republican Party pushes to end child poverty, when the Republican Party pushes for paid sick leave, when the Republican Party pushes for universal child care, then they could talk to me about child abuse. Until then, they are the child abusers, along with corrupt corporate Democrats who don't push for any of those things. Sorry, this is getting me into a state. All right, moving on to a little bit of a lighter topic, but obviously at Status Coup, we have covered the John Deere strikes we covered on the ground in Iowa last year. We've covered the Starbucks workers on strike. We just covered that in South Jersey last week. That video is up on the channel. We spoke with Starbucks workers that were on strike. We've covered the Alabama coal miners on strike. We covered the Nabisco workers on strike, the Frito-Lay workers on strike. And now, not currently, but there is the possibility that literally over 100,000 workers in this country could go on strike in a month. Let me repeat. Over 100,000 railroad workers could go on strike in a month. And it's getting no media attention. Shock. I interviewed Ron. He is a longtime railroad worker. He's actually long been involved with the railroad unions, which is very, very important. As you know, railroad workers have been absolutely just, I mean, I don't know what other word to use than brutalized. Draconian attendance policies, barely get any time off. Their pay is not even close to where inflation is. And there is a major contract impasse right now. So Biden stepped in and put in basically a presidential board to negotiate or be the broker between the railroad companies, which are making literally billions in profit as they exploit their workers, and the workers and their unions. And shockingly, Biden's board is very, very tilted to what, and its recommendations is very, very tilted to what the railroad companies want. So I had a pretty long interview with Ron. This is Ron. He is a longtime railroad workers. Let me get for you his exact title. One second. Ron Kamenkow. He's the Railroad Workers United General Secretary. So he's high up there. Smash the like button, share this live stream. Here's my interview with Ron Kamenkow about a potential huge historic strike. Hey, it's Jordan. I'm delighted to be joined by Ron Kamenkow. You are a long-time worker, and frankly, I think this is one of the biggest stories in America that naturally the mainstream media is ignoring. We're not there yet, but potentially there could be a massive railroad worker strike. President Biden appointed a special board recently because of a contract impasse where basically, as I understand it, over 100,000 railroad workers have been working without a contract for many years. There's a lot of grievances, not just pay, but they basically don't have days off. They are on call essentially 24/7, not to mention the conditions. So first, tell my audience a little bit about yourself, your career path, and what you've experienced as a railroad worker in America. Because from what I'm reading, these are some of the most burdensome working conditions, scheduling that I've heard of.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Jordan. I did hire out about 25, 26 years ago in Chicago with a railroad that mostly does not exist anymore called Conrail. At the time, it was a Class 1 railroad. In 1999, it was gobbled up by the other two big Class 1 railroads in the East, part of it going to Norfolk Southern and part of it going to CSX. Ironically, at that time, 1999, we had what was called a full-scale meltdown of the railroad, and parked trains, very, very long dwell time in yards, very, very low speed over the road, and many of the problems that we're seeing here 23 years later, I first experienced firsthand when those corporations were incapable of properly merging the railroad into their network. And so we've seen this this story before. Union Pacific had a meltdown a few years earlier when they gobbled up the Southern Pacific and the Chicago Northwestern. And there's been multiple recorded cases where the rail industry just simply cannot properly manage the railroads, and chronic short staffing. And in recent years, the railroad has moved to this model of cut just about everything to the bone and trying to not have one more person on the payroll than absolutely necessary. But this doesn't work well because railroads are prone to a boom and bust economy, of course. They're prone to floods and washout, and that's the situation basically that we're in now. And their only response is typical railroad, what I experienced when I first hired in nearly 3 decades ago, more discipline. The punishment will continue. So rather than take a progressive approach and make the workplace environment more desirable and enticing for people to hire in and to come to work, they simply crack the whip and say, we have a new availability policy and you will be here to come to work. And it's not working.
And I should have said at the beginning, President Biden basically stepped in to prevent a strike. He appointed this board based on the Railway Labor Act of 1926. So he appointed a presidential emergency board to basically mediate between the railroad companies and the rail unions. And basically what this board has come up with, from my interpretation, are wage increases that do not really even match the rate of inflation, and very few changes as far as scheduling, more time off, things like that. Can you kind of give a little bit more on the problem that has been scheduling, where workers don't really get days off? They're on call quite a bit. Obviously, this affects family time and kind of having a work-life balance in the rail industry.
Yeah, the Presidential Emergency Board, it was PEB number 250. So there was 249 PEBs over the last century or so prior to this one. So it's nothing new for the President of the United States to step in and under the Railway Labor Act, this is protocol, to appoint a 3-person panel known as a Presidential Emergency Board to make recommendations. They're non-binding, but they do carry a lot of political weight. What was curious is that the union leadership was expecting a better PEB than this one, we would speculate. The rail carriers, on the other hand, from their point of view, they may have been expecting one that was quote unquote worse for them. As it turned out, the very next day, August 17th, we awoke to a jubilant rail industry. Its mouthpieces, the American Association of Railroads, and its bargaining wing, the National Carriers Conference Committee, were both crowing about that this was fair and equitable, and they were ready to move forward under the basis of these recommendations. The unions, on the other hand, and the rank and file in particular, not so happy. If you read the summary, and Railroad Workers United just came out with a bulletin yesterday morning that summarizes quite nicely the PEB's position on most work rule questions. So leaving aside wages and healthcare for the moment, on the question of work rules, pretty much everything that the 12 different crafts and the 12 different unions asked for, the PEB basically had 2 responses. One was go back and continue to bargain, which is kind of ironic since the PEB is in place because bargaining has gone nowhere for 2.5 years. I'm not sure what makes the PEB believe that going back to the bargaining table is necessarily going to achieve a whole lot at this point. But yeah, their response is either go back to the bargaining table and bargain this with the carriers, or simply withdraw the proposal. And that was the response to about a dozen or more requests from the myriad unions for changes in work rules. And this, of course, encompasses the all-important hours of work, time off the job, and so forth. So, for example, the unions asked for the ability to bargain over attendance policies. That was rejected by the PEB. The union asked for 3 additional federal holidays. That was rejected by the PEB. The union asked for the ability to have schedules that gave people a better idea of when they were going to work and having some semblance of regular off days for conductors and engineers. That once again was rejected by the PEB. And so, unfortunately, on issues of quality of work life, retention and recruitment of railroad workers, particularly conductors and engineers in what's called the T&E craft, the PEB really did fail us because it's not addressing the reasons why people are leaving the industry basically in numbers heretofore completely unheard of. So it's a bit of a letdown at this point for a lot of us in the industry.
And could you kind of explain what the attendance policy is? Because it's pretty brutal. The attendancy policy that most of these rail carriers mandate to their workers. very few days off, very few weekend days off, from what I could tell. Workers I've read, working, weeks in a row without a day off. Can you kind of describe the attendance policies?
Yeah, so railroading is a 24/7 industry, and we have lots of industries that are 24/7, of course, healthcare, most of transportation, et cetera, et cetera. Um, Nevertheless, that's no excuse for the workers to have to be 24/7. But historically, railroad workers have worked very, very long shifts. We are now regulated by federal law to a limit of 12 hours, at least those of us in safety sensitive occupations like engineer, conductor, yard master, and so forth. But you can return to work generally in 10 hours. Um, we are on call for the most part. If you are a freight conductor or a freight engineer working for a class 1 railroad in this country, basically you're on call. And the historically, we had the right to do what's called mark off. And so if you wanted time off, if you were feeling fatigued, if you had a personal matter in your life you wanted to attend to, or if you just wanted to just take off and just drop out for a few days or even a few weeks, you never got paid because we don't have sick time. We've never had sick time in the train and engine craft and in other crafts as well on the railroad. And so while that was a negative, it was probably a net positive gain for us because very few jobs do you have the right to just simply take time off when you want. You don't get paid, but hey, I get to take off. Well, that all went away. And now things are very, very harsh. They've swung in the complete and opposite direction where there's a point system now on many of the big class 1 railroads, and it seems to be that that's going to be the wave of the future. So it's quote unquote objective in nature, but that's ridiculous because life isn't objective. Different people get sick, get pregnant, have family issues, have bigger or larger families, have sick children, and for all kinds of reasons need time off work. And it's kind of a no excuse policy. And this makes life very, very difficult. So you see people with 10, 15, and 20 years seniority who never in the past would have quit a railroad job. They're jacking it in and just literally quitting on the spot and saying they've had enough, they can't take it. In addition, people have been fired under these new attendance policies as well for poor performance. The thing we got to understand here, Jordan, and the industry will never fess up to this and bring this out. The industry likes to say, look, we give these guys 4 or 5 weeks vacation. True, if you have 15, 20, or 25 years, that's first thing on the vacation. Oh, we give these guys 12 personal days. Once again, true, but you build up to that over 10, 20, 30 years of seniority to get those personal days. Then they'll say that they have holidays. Well, true, some crafts, particularly in the yard, will get paid, but that doesn't mean you get the day off. So when we're talking about time off, holidays don't necessarily apply to many workers on the railroad. You might make double time and a half for working the holiday, let's say, but this isn't what we're talking about here. We're talking about quality of work life, the ability to take time off, be with our families, and have a life. So once again, they're being disingenuous when they talk about holidays, personal days, and vacation. But the big one is we don't have scheduled off days in the train and engine craft on class 1 railroads in this country in freight service. For the most part, every engineer and conductor who's out there running a train right now down the railroad in all 48 states doesn't have weekends off, doesn't even have Monday, Tuesday off. We do not have scheduled days off. So the average worker starts with, let's say, 104 days off per year right out of the box, right? 2 out of 7. We start with 0 out of 7. And so under those conditions, to mandate these harsh availability policies, and keep in mind, we don't have sick time either. So we're not getting paid when we do take off work, when we call up the caller, the crew caller, and say, mark me off sick. I do not get paid for that time. So it's a bit ironic that we're, faced with such harsh demands for our attendance at work, given the existing conditions already.
Right. And I just want to point out, because obviously this is America, which I call the United Corporations of America. These railroad industries that are, basically giving you, no time off really. And that's why so many people are leaving. They're doing pretty damn good for themselves financially. This is the rail industry, which carries about 40% of U.S. freight, is dominated by just 7 major railways that collected a record 1.18 billion in fees for freight stuck in supply chain bottlenecks in the first 9 months of 2021, and has seen a flurry of lawsuits over these charges. So over $1 billion, basically, just in the first 9 months of last year. I don't know what it is this year. They estimated that since 2010, the industry spent $46 billion or more on stock buybacks and dividends than on maintenance and equipment investments. So they're making money, and their shareholders are making money, but they're not giving their workers, reasonable time off. The wage increases that they're proposing don't even match inflation. And like you said, people who have been working there for 15, 20 years are, heading for the exits.
Yeah, interestingly, in speaking to the Presidential Emergency Board, and all of this is in the 124-page PEB report, the rail carriers actually touched on this, and they had the audacity to say that their railroad employees had nothing to do with them taking the risk and then making this kind of money. I find it kind of curious, that there's a risk. The railroads, the Class 1 railroads, made record profits right through the Great Recession of 2008. The Class 1 railroads made record profits right through the pandemic. And so for 25 years now, the rail industry has been cranking up record profits, record low operating ratios, astronomical pay for CEOs, and so forth. And so in this context, one would hope that their employees were well compensated, and one would also hope that the rail industry would be expanding. Rail is the most efficient way to move freight and passengers. It has a very low carbon footprint. A ton of freight can move 3 times farther on a rail for a gallon of fuel than, let's say, a semi moving down the highway. Railroads are just undoubtedly the safest and most environmentally friendly means of transportation. However, we're moving less freight than we did 16 years ago. Now, this is almost hard to grasp. Here's an industry that is making record profits, that has record high stock prices, yet during this same 16 years, the trucking industry has expanded by about 40%. The economy has grown by leaps and bounds. And yet here's this great, vital national resource called the U.S. rail network, which, by the way, is still the biggest rail network in the world, bar none. And yet we're not really making use of it to its fullest potential. The rail industry, instead of growing its business, has decided that it can actually shrink its business, cut costs, raise prices, and achieve its financial goals in that manner. But this isn't really a help to shippers. It's certainly not a help to Amtrak, as delayed trains are chronic feature of Amtrak because we're stuck behind 3-mile-long freight trains, which is all part of this modus operandi of cutting costs and saving money. And it's not good for the nation. It's certainly not good for the environment, because if we're not moving more freight by rail, it means we're moving more freight by truck. And this isn't good for motorists. It's not good for our highway system. It's not good for the environment and clean air and so forth and so on. So tragically, much of the rail industry's profits, as you pointed out, Jordan, is going into stock buybacks and dividends, exorbitant salaries for CEOs. And this is nothing unusual. This is sort of the economy. This is the way capitalism is working, or not working for that matter. And so they do invest a certain amount in capital expenditure. But it's a little disingenuous when they talk about the tens of billions that they have spent on capital expenditure, because really the vast majority of what they're spending isn't capital expenditure in the true sense of the word. It's basic maintenance. It's on rail and ties and ballast and the things that you basically have to do. If you owned a house, these things are not considered improvements. In other words, expansions. Putting a new roof on and getting the house painted are simply basic maintenance of the physical plant that needs to be done. In terms of double tracking, electrification, higher speed limits, more classification yards, and other infrastructure, there's practically nothing has been spent in the last 25 years.
And, with the supply chain crisis that we've been in, which obviously the pandemic played a big role, obviously, if you have unprecedented level of rail and freight workers quitting, that's going to have a domino effect in terms of delaying the rail transportation, which also plays a part in inflation because we already have a supply shortage. If there's delays in moving products because workers just can't work the job anymore, they're not getting enough time off, their pay is not good enough, workers are quitting in bulk, then we have further supply bottlenecks, which then are passed down to the customer, basically. Can you kind of talk about the effect of the exodus of rail workers on the supply chain crisis?
Yeah, and there's lots of different theories, of course, as to how the supply chains got so buggered up. And granted, there was a steep drop in international and domestic freight traffic for the first few months, of course, of the pandemic. And then once the pandemic got sorted out, things rebounded, and there was a huge spike in international traffic. China cranked up once again. Hundreds of ships were coming across the Pacific. And then there was obviously going to be bottlenecks. I mean, these sorts of booms and busts, mass fluctuations are going to wreak havoc upon the supply chain. But if an industry is not prepared for such fluctuation, as the rail industry has not been, in general, we have been operating under a model called precision scheduled railroading. It's a bit of a misnomer, but basically what it's all about is cutting costs and moving the same amount of freight with far less workers. In fact, we lost 25 to 30% of our workforce leading up to and including into the pandemic. So the rail industry was extremely ill prepared for the rebound in traffic when it came. And so in addition to just naturally having these, supply chain bottlenecks at places like LA Long Beach and other ports around the world, various pinch points, now you just didn't have enough conductors and engineers to move a train out of the port. And then numerous crews would outlaw under the hours of service law, and there would not be a rested crew to move the train. So now a train en route from LA Long Beach to Chicago would be tied down, and that means putting handbrakes on it while the crew is taken off the train, taken to a hotel to get its federal mandatory rest, the train sits there until a relief crew is rested and can come and recrew the train. And so, under normal circumstances, let's say maybe 5% of your train crews would outlaw and need to be recrewed. There are places in the country now where that figure is up to 10, 15, and even 20%. So that 1 out of 5 trains that make a start will end up being sidelined, at least momentarily, if not for hours and hours, and in some cases days, in wait for a rested crew. And so the railroad is trying to dig itself out of a hole right now. But ironically, that brings us around full circle to the whole question of bargaining and the potential for a national strike. One would think that an industry that has been severely crippled by its lack of employees, by people leaving the industry in unprecedented numbers, that industry might come to the bargaining table with its unions and say, hey, look, what can we do to make this workplace more attractive? What can we do to retain people? What can we do to recruit people and make this a job that was once known as a very, very good blue-collar job, one of the best jobs you could get, especially without a college education? What can we do? But the industry isn't saying that. The industry is coming to us saying, we do not want to change anything, basically. Um, so you wonder what the future of the railroad industry is going to look like. Are we going to be in a perpetual crisis and be short-staffed? I certainly hope not. I used to encourage and entice friends, neighbors, strangers, just about everybody. I said, get a job on the railroad. You know, why are you working in this coffee shop? Or why are you doing a job where you can make a lot more money and actually enjoy yourself? It's actually a wonderful job in so many ways. I cannot in good conscience now suggest to people that they get a job in train and engine service or probably any of the crafts on the railroad. It's extremely unfortunate.
Right. And where do things go from here? I mean, obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, over 100,000 workers. So if the railroads don't move with, at least on the scheduling, a better offer, I don't know what you think about the offer they made on pay. From what I could tell, it's better, but it doesn't really meet inflation. Could we see a major strike, and what would that look like? Because I mean, I know my history. I don't remember the last time 100,000 workers went on strike in America.
Yeah, and the last time that railroad workers went on strike was 1991, so over 30 years ago. It's very difficult for railroad workers to actually strike, and in fact, this is probably a huge problem, and in some ways might be the root of why we're in the mess that we're in. If railroad workers were not so hamstrung by the Railway Labor Act, then there would be railroad strikes. And there used to be lots of railroad strikes. And I'm not saying that that's the best way to run an economy, but when an employer exceeds their authority, when an employer refuses to bargain in good faith, when an employer has worked itself into a hole the way the railroad industry has done here in recent years, if its workforce is capable of actually fomenting a successful strike, it reins that industry in to do the right thing. Strikes do have a way of balancing things out, and workers, and railroad workers are no exception, don't ask for the moon and the stars. They simply ask for basic, reasonable, humane working conditions. And that's what's really on the table here. And under the Railway Labor Act, we've been bargaining now for 2.5 years. We've finally gone through the Presidential Emergency Board. stage of the act. It has issued its recommendations. The rail unions are free to reject those recommendations and exercise their right to self-help on September 16th or later. However, if we were to exercise our right to self-help on September 16th, it's quite likely that Congress would meet within hours and pass legislation remanding us back to work. And so the ability to actually exercise that power that we ostensibly have as workers through our unions to rectify the situation and to restore some semblance of balance of power between employers on the one hand and workers on the other is very difficult for us to achieve as a result of the Railway Labor Act. Now, will there be a strike? I don't know. Will that strike be quashed by the federal government in a matter of hours? Once again, I don't know. It's hard to say given the complexion of Congress. Political wrangling and maneuvering between the two parties could potentially delay a back to work order for a day or two or three. But one thing we do know is if there is a strike, regardless of whether it's a matter of hours, a matter of days, or a matter of weeks, which, like I say, is extremely unlikely, much of the economy will be affected. And the rail industry stands to lose, of course, millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, simply by shutting down the entire network, getting everyone in train and engine service back home, and then 10 hours later or 2 days later, or what it might be, gearing back up, getting everybody back on the trains and getting the system running again and getting it fluid. It's not fluid now, so to get it back into some semblance of normalcy could take days or even weeks or even months.
I'd love your thoughts, not to get so political, but, Biden, he has run and he has kind of marketed himself as a union guy. He likes to talk about his father and, the dignity of a job and that he's very pro-union. Well, what you're describing obviously goes beyond Biden. Is a lot of politicians that claim to be, union guys and gals, that essentially they would essentially knock down the union's right to strike. Obviously, because of this law from the early 20th century. So there seems to be a mismatch between the rhetoric of Biden and other politicians that they're with the workers, they're with the unions. But if you actually, you don't really have much ability to go on a strike based on the Railroad Act.
Yeah, it's true, and this is one thing that generally Republicans and Democrats agree on completely. And we may see this spectacle, and I'm sure the media will remark about it, that if and when railroad workers strike, the vote will be incredibly lopsided, probably somewhere on the order of 450 to 3 to send us back to work, and generally send us back to work under the terms, the recommendation of the PEB. And so, there's an argument to be made that in effect the U.S. is violating international, labor codes by doing this because they're usurping the right of workers to take self-help activity, to strike, and it is one of the basic codes agreed to, internationally, that workers do have the right to strike. And ostensibly, we do have that right in this country as railroad workers. But then, of course, what the Railway Labor Act gives with one hand, it takes away with the other. So, there's people who call for the Railway Labor Act to be amended. It would be a fine idea. There are certain amendments to both NLRA and RLA that we certainly could stand to see in this country. But putting it on the table could risk actually having it amended in the wrong way and making it even more restrictive. So it is what it is. We live to labor under it. It's in the coming days. I think we will see. Well, the story will be told as to how this is going to shake out. Um, but right now, workers are still digesting what all has been recommended by the labor or the PEB. The unions are still deciding, what position to take, and whether or not we'll actually see a tentative agreement put before the membership for a vote in the coming weeks remains to be seen.
Hmm. And when's the deadline for a contract? If there's going to be a contract, when's the deadline? And if there's not, how soon could we potentially see, even though you say it's unlikely, a strike?
Yeah, September 16th is the date, and that's 30 days from the announcement of the PEB, which of course was announced August 16th. But that doesn't mean that there will be a strike on the 16th, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be an agreement on the 16th. If the rail industry and the unions are back at the bargaining table, attempting to hammer out a tentative agreement based upon the PEB recommendations, the parties can mutually agree to extend that deadline. So bargaining could proceed apace for quite some time into the fall, or even longer, possibly. And then, of course, we need time to actually have a ratification vote, and the parties would agree to extend the deadline, most likely until the vote tallies come in and so forth. And then at that point, if the rank and file were to reject the tentative agreement, once again, we're in a situation where we could actually strike at that point, or once again go back to the bargaining table. So it's a long, drawn out, convoluted process.
And I should also say, it's not one, you're about 13 different unions, correct? You're talking about 13 different separate rail unions. So it's, there's a lot of different factions here that have to agree on something.
Exactly. And this is a historic moment for us because it is the first time that all of the unions that are party to the National Freight Agreement, and there's 12 of them, are actually bargaining as a group. They're completely united as the United Rail Unions, and this includes all the different crafts that are represented by unions in the United States that work for these large Class 1 rail corporations. And so there's obviously a lot of internal politics and lots of historic differences between the different unions and the different crafts. So hopefully that coalition will hold together throughout this process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time, Ron Cannon-Cow. You are a longtime rail worker, and we'll definitely stay on this because could be historic. We'll see.
Thanks, Jordan. We'll keep in touch. I'm sure the coming days will tell the story.
Absolutely, for sure. Thanks again. Take care. All right, smash that like button, thumbs up button right under the live stream. The more people that press like, the more people that will see this very live stream. Again, we're not technically live. I'm recording this earlier, but you get the point. Smash the like button, share this live stream. Super chats are appreciated. I don't see the corporate media interviewing Ron. I don't see the corporate media covering a potentially massive rail strike. We are. So support us if you can. Before we move on to the next topic, honestly, this could be massive. This could be absolutely massive. Obviously, like he said, the odds are stacked against them. The Railway Act of 1920 something makes it very difficult for them to go on strike. The Railway Labor Act of 1926, to be exact. Does make it difficult for them to go on strike. Obviously, Biden is a fake union guy. And if they went on strike, Biden, Democrats and Republicans would probably come together lickety-split to crush them and get them back to work. But that doesn't mean 100,000 workers, over 100,000 workers going on strike wouldn't be a massive story. I mean, obviously, we've seen strikes, the John Deere workers, Frito-Lay, Nabisco, the Alabama coal miners who are still on strike. Starbucks workers have gone on strike during this union movement. There's been a whole lot of strikes, but those numbers pale in comparison to over 100,000 workers. So we'll stay on it. We'll try to interview more people with the railroad industry, rail workers, freight workers, because it could be really historic if it actually happens. And it could happen. They said middle of September is possibly, when they could go on strike. So we'll follow it. We're moving on. Again, smash that like button, share this live stream. I want to air 2 interviews I did during my most recent reporting trip. If you remember, recently, Colin and I went to Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia. We covered what I am calling the economic hellscape, contrary to what Biden and the Democrats and the media are putting out there. With jobs are coming back and unemployment's low and GDP's great. Yeah, well, we actually went out there for 8 days and actually showed you. Actually, it's an economic Hunger Games. Most of the jobs that are coming back are the same shitty non-living wage jobs that people have been suffering with for about 2 to 3 decades, and most people are just kind of treading water with gas prices, which are still high, food prices high, electricity high. We're not even getting into rent, which is skyrocketing, 20 to 30% rent increases, homelessness exploding. We covered it all. We interviewed homeless individuals. We covered skyrocketing gas prices. We spoke with people that honestly don't know if they're going to be able to pay their rent that month. We spoke with people that have had to, pull their kids out of Little League because they can't afford it with inflation. One woman told me, I'd love to protest, but I can't fill up the car to get to the protest. So we covered a lot of those things. And in West Virginia in particular, we spoke with folks about, who are the victims of Joe Manchin's corruption. We spoke with homeless advocates, one person who is homeless and also an activist. We also covered really, really falling apart apartment complexes that have, black mold and floors that are caving in and human feces coming from the ceiling and flies everywhere. Really, really just in the wealthiest country on earth, really, really terrible living conditions that are leading people to actually be on oxygen in their homes because of the black mold swirling around. So here are interviews I did in West Virginia in an apartment complex, kind of on the border of Kentucky and West Virginia. I interviewed a husband and wife who have a disabled daughter. The husband is disabled and he's a veteran who fought for our country. The wife has had one part of her lungs removed recently. And just watch this interview. It's just chilling. The conditions they've been living in, what they've been dealing with the landlord. It's just horrible. And then we'll air an interview with another woman who lives in this complex. One of her legs has been amputated, unrelated to the apartment complex. She got bad news one day, bad health news, and then came home to an eviction notice. And this one complex, all the residents in 3 different buildings got mass eviction notices that they are now fighting. So without further ado, here's those interviews. Hey there, it's Jordan with Status Coup. We are in Huntington, West Virginia, here at the Wynwood Apartments. I wish you could call them good living, but these folks are living in really uninhabitable conditions. Sir, William?
Yes, sir.
William. So you guys got moved over here, your daughter, your wife. You were in building 2?
The daughter she recently come here.
Okay. And tell me about where you were and what the conditions were there.
The conditions were uninhabitable. Our floor was caving in the kitchen. It also started caving in the living room. And we had our neighbors upstairs were constantly thumping and banging and throwing stuff against the floor, and they caused a leak in their bathroom, which in turn flooded our restroom, and nothing was ever done.
You've had some breathing problems. You've had an issue with your health since moving in here. Tell me about what's been going on.
I am a diabetic. I have a blood pressure problem. I recently got out of the hospital for COVID. I have only one lung because 2 years ago they removed one of my lungs. I had a lot of breathing problems that was caused to me too before they moved us over here. They was mold so bad, honest to God. My lung specialist had a cow because I told him the truth. He said, "Well, that black mold can cause scarring of your lungs." And see, I didn't know this. I mean, we've had a horrible time. I mean, I can't. And when you have an emergency, there's nobody responding. The landlord won't answer. The maintenance men won't answer. What are we supposed to do?
No, they don't have a voicemail. They don't have a way to leave a message. I called the other day about some issues that were going on. Phone rang and rang and rang. It went to voicemail. This voicemail box has not yet been set up, so we couldn't leave a message. But about 15 minutes later, they called. He said somebody called, and he found out. He thought it might have been somebody like wanting a new apartment or something like that. But when he found out I was calling from Wynwood, his whole attitude changed. It was just like, real short and real disrespectful.
Right.
Disrespectful. And we're up to date on our rent. Everything is paid. We shouldn't be treated this way.
I mean, it's boiling hot out.
Yeah, it's boiling hot out. Not just recently, they had a flood that flooded several apartments on that side and out into the hallway, and was even coming in underneath our floor into the kitchen over here. The water was, and it was septic water. It was drainage water.
See a big old, huge pile of water. It was from everywhere in the whole hallway. The whole stretch of it was like a swimming pool. I'm like, where is this coming from? I'm just like a nightmare.
What did they do about it?
Just come over and sucked it up with some. I don't know how they got it to stop, but I'm thankful for that.
They came and they got his guys. They dug up some concrete outside and found out the leak was, in one of the main lines. And they supposedly fixed this, but this is after the flood had happened. But as far as the water that was out in the hallway or the water that was in these apartments, I don't know what they did, because they never once came over to clean these carpets, to suck the water up. Nobody. Even I asked a maintenance guy, are they going to come and get this up? This is nasty. It's stinking the hallway. This is, it's unacceptable. It's not.
My own nurses.
It's nasty.
I have nurses that can verify everything, because I had nurses from the hospital coming here to see me whenever I got out of the hospital with COVID. And they'll tell you the conditions they've seen. They couldn't believe it, and I'll be honest, I was embarrassed over it. I mean, nurses coming out of St. Mary's Hospital, and I'm like, how do you explain you got a landlord like that?
Well, also, COVID attacks your respiratory system, and you're already getting attacked every day, your respiratory system, with the mold.
3 different breathing treatments.
3 different breathing treatments?
Yeah, daily, including oxygen over there. That's what that is, that big machine.
I mean, you're not an old person, so.
No, my health is not good. The mold was awful in that other place, though. I mean, oh my God, it was bad. It was attacking our breathing bad. We were smothering.
And I could hear you breathing heavily now, and you're saying it's better over here, even though breathing isn't so easy.
It is actually better over here. This building, I guess, is pretty much on concrete, where we don't have to deal with the struts and stuff coming through the apartment beneath us. But, it's awful. Landlords think they have, once they get you in a place, they think they have you, that we have no rights. A lot of people screamed and, really got upset because the paper we got was not from the court, was not signed by a judge, wasn't delivered by a police officer like a normal eviction notice has to be. It was just a piece of paper that said, you are evicted immediately. Why?
No,
And for a long time, and we can never get no answer.
my daughter's allergic to the ultraviolet rays of the sun. She's special needs. And here I am thinking, well, how can he kick everybody out and make us homeless? I mean, if she's out in the sun very long, she'll end up in the ICU unit with sun poisoning. The child's allergic to it. I mean, it's like they don't think of all the medical conditions some of us have.
There's a lot of disabled people too.
Yeah.
I'm disabled. I'm on disability. I'm not afraid to admit it. I have a bad leg. I have COPD. I have diabetes.
Hip replacement.
You know, I had hip replacement, was one that's been recalled, and I have, you know, little loose use of my right leg. There's a lot of things going on. I can't afford to just pack up and move.
And what'd you do for a living before?
I was a sanitation worker for the city of Huntington for several years. I worked for a corporation that did vegetation management for the railroad. We set trucks on the tracks and ran what they call high rail tanker trucks. I sprayed for vegetation to keep the tracks clear. You know, that was and it was a very lucrative job.
Tough work on the body.
Yeah, tough work on the body. I've never had an easy job in my life. And I even told them when they give me disability, I don't want disability, I want fixed, I want to go back to work. But, you know, here I am. I'm struggling from month to month. You know, the rent and utilities, well, just the rent, it covers utilities here, is over half of my income. And she can't work because she got physical disabilities. This is a place like this is the only place we have. And to have our landlord stand up and say, well, you're evicted, you're on drugs. No, we're not. Some of them are. You know, you're going to have that everywhere. But don't accuse the ones that aren't doing everything.
Have you heard from anybody from the city? Are they doing anything about once you got the eviction notice?
No. We've been notified by legal aid. You know, they're going to represent us in several things going through this and try to get things straight, you know, for the people that need it. You know, there are people that take advantage of, and there are people that need it. Well, we need a place to live.
Right.
We don't have anywhere else. We don't have nothing else.
You got the flag up here. You got the flag on your hat. This is America. You expect to see these things in kind of poorer third world kind of countries.
I'm speechless about all that. I really am. Because there are people in other countries. You know, we're supposed to live, like you said, in the wealthiest nation in the world. And there are people that live better than what we are, and we pay more for it.
It seems like poor people are singled out.
Say it again.
It seems like poor people are singled out. It seems like we're hated. And I don't understand that. We're good people. We're just poor. I mean, we're not bad people just because we're poor, but we get treated that way. I don't understand what happened to America.
And I'm a vet. I served my country.
Where'd you serve?
I served in the Army I served 2 years, and I was in the reserve for 2 years. And I get done like this.
How you guys dealing also with inflation? You got the gas prices, the food I mean, we just got 2 sandwiches. It was $33.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, soda too, but still. How you guys dealing with the prices? You're on a fixed income disability money. It's got to be hard.
Well, it's a day-to-day thing. The end of the month. You know, we help each other out. We do what we can because if, you know, I'm lucky to have a few tight-knit group of friends that I can actually call friends. Actually, on less than one hand that help us out. And there's turns that we help them out. It just, you know, we got to stick together.
Right.
Because if you don't stick together, ain't nothing ever going to happen. We have to help each other. If she's down and out, I'm going to help her. If I'm down and out, she's going to help us. You know, I have a brother that I've had for a long time. I've rode motorcycles with him damn near all my life. And me and him are that way. I've always helped him, and he's always helped me. He's always been there for me. You know, I'm an old school biker, I'll tell you that. And without some of them, I wouldn't make it. I mean, you can tell, look, I mean, we don't have a whole lot.
So you got President Biden is saying the economy is coming back, the jobs are coming back, the unemployment number is low. I don't know. I'm going around the country. Maybe it's good for some, high class folks, but the media and the president are saying the economy is doing better. I see a lot of poverty, and I see a lot of people who are one step away from poverty and homelessness.
Exactly. Every day you're just one step away. If you count your blessings, you better count them really good, because tomorrow they may not be there. I never expected at 53 years old I'd be in this condition, be fighting every day just to survive. And especially in this mess, fighting every day just to keep a roof over my head. I've been homeless. I know what the homeless go through. I've been there. Living on the street, no place to go, turned away from the mission, turned away from other places. But I got myself up, and I, thought I had a good straight life. And then you got things like this that just want to come at you and say, oh, you got to move. Everybody's on drugs, you got to move. No, I'm not on drugs. I'm just poor.
You guys worried for her future? Obviously, she's got...
Yeah, I worry all the time because she was born with 40% brain damage, epilepsy. She's got 8 medical conditions. I get afraid what's going to happen to her if something happens to us. There'll be nobody to take care of her. People don't understand. She can't get out in the sun like normal people. It puts her in a hospital. It just scares me to death.
Lucky to have you.
Do the right thing by the people that do right. All we want is just to live, have a good roof over our head, and the bills paid, which they are paid. Just do right. Don't take advantage. Because you take advantage, one day you could be sitting in our position. Nothing is promised for tomorrow.
Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup at the Wynwood Apartments in Huntington, West Virginia, here with Alyssa. And you are one of the many who got eviction notices a month ago in these apartments. Black mold, the floors caving in, human waste coming from the ceilings. Obviously, you're disabled. Tell me about how long you lived here and the eviction notice you got and what reason you were given.
I wasn't given any reason why I got the notice. It's just everybody got a reason. But before that I got an eviction notice because I was late on my rent. And then I had went to the doctor and I got some bad news, and then the same day I got the note on the door. So it wasn't a very good day.
So you went to the doctor, gave you some bad news, you come home, you get an eviction notice. Obviously, you're not in a situation where you could just move. Right. You're not able to. Can you kind of talk to me about your health? I know you've been going through it recently.
Yeah. I have muscular dystrophy. That's why I'm in the chair, and my leg's been amputated. But I've been having problems with my mouth, and I went to the ear, nose, and throat doctor, and he told me that they thought for sure that I had cancer in my mouth. Anyway, he had told me that, and then I come home, and then I seen the note on the door, and it went from there.
Can you kind of, as best as you could talk about the conditions you've been dealing with, have you been dealing with mold in the apartment and other things?
Yeah, I have mold, and I've been having problems in my bathroom. My sink is filled up, and my toilet don't work, and there's been water running all the way into my bedroom, and I've been having problems like that the whole time I've lived here.
And when you call, to get repairs, to get help? Do they respond?
No, they don't. So we have to try to fix it as best as we can.
And how much are you paying a month to live in these conditions?
Well, I get HUD, so I pay what HUD doesn't pay.
The mold, I mean, I could even breathe it through the mask. What does it say to you that you guys are living like this? And this is supposed to be, you know, the wealthiest country on earth. They say the economy is doing better and the jobs are coming back. But there's a lot of places like this all over the country where it's really unlivable conditions.
Yeah, it could be a lot better. I mean, we could live a lot nicer.
Thank you.
If that doesn't make you outraged, if that doesn't possibly shed some tears, I don't know what will. There were several parts that stood out to me, but you know, the one woman saying, you know, why do they hate us for being poor? We're good people. We're just poor. You know, the veteran talking about how he's fought for this country and they do him like this. With the big American flag behind him, but look what he and his wife and child have been dealing with. Obviously, the last woman I interviewed who, I mean, her leg had to be amputated, totally unrelated to this, but she gets really bad health news one day, cancer, and then comes home to an eviction notice. I mean, this is not just happening in West Virginia. I mean, I could tell you, I was in Akron too, as part of this road trip and interviewed a housing activist. She sent me video. People are living in, you know, maggot, termite infested units in Akron, Ohio, while the downtown and other parts are being gentrified. And they go to the city, they go to their politicians. Politicians give them lip service, do nothing. This is happening in so many places where gentrification, which I call economic terrorism, is just destroying communities where, you know, a nice downtown set of blocks, maybe 6 to 10 blocks, are wonderful, great bars, restaurants, Whole Foods, high-rise luxury condos. And then you drive 10 to 15 minutes the other part of town, and it's like, in some cases, living in a third world. This is happening in the United States of America, i.e. the United Corporations of America. And the media doesn't cover it. We do. We cover it. We cover what the corporate media covers up. So if it's within your means, the only way we could grow, and we're trying to grow, if you've noticed, we now have Kim Brown of Burn It Down with Kim Brown. She's hosting a show once a week. Tina, who's been co-hosting with me for a while, Tina Desiree Berg, she's now hosting a show once a week, The Right Wing Insanity Report, which we premiered last night. So definitely check that out. The whole stream is up. She interviewed a journalist who was attacked by anti-maskers. We also have Spencer Snyder, who is a journalist who's doing a video each week for us, focusing on the corporate media gaslighting, corporate media's hypocrisy, corporate media's conflicts of interest. We're calling it breaking news, all caps on the breaking. Break, B-R-E-A-K, is in capital letters because the country's breaking. So kind of a pun on breaking news. Obviously, we're paying all these people, and a lot of times we are losing money by obviously having these freelancers host shows and this and that, because it's not like we're getting enough in super chats or every show to even cover the costs of having new faces and new voices. But I think it's important. Status Coup can't just be me. And, I am trying to find other reporters that could go on the ground, because I'm only one person. I'm no young spring chicken anymore. So I can't cover every story on the ground. Like I said, in the fall, I'm trying to, possibly take some time off to write a book. So I might take off a few weeks, possibly a few months, to work on a book on my, 6 years of reporting on the Flint water crisis and cover up. which I just finished the outline. So I'm hoping to find a publisher for this book. But this on the ground reporting, do you see anybody else doing it? Honestly, do you see anyone else doing the on the ground reporting that we're doing? You see anyone else going through 3 states in 8 days, driving 1,500 miles, interviewing people, homeless people, poor people, working people? No, you don't, because they don't want to cover these stories. We do. So if you value those stories, if you value giving the microphone back to the people, giving the microphone to people like William and his wife and Alyssa, that will not ever be invited on CNN, that will not ever be invited on MSNBC, that the New York Times, Washington Post will not cover or quote them or interview them, please sign up as a Status Coup member today, right now. StatusCoup.com/join. You could become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Super, super helpful. Again, $5 to $10 a month. It makes a big, big difference. And we're going to have our members only call next week, probably Monday or Tuesday. So if you sign up as a member today, you'll be invited to our monthly members call. We do it through Zoom. You get the link and you could have your video on. You could turn your video off and just listen. I answer your questions, comments, concerns. It's always a lot of fun. So definitely sign up, StatusCoup.com/join. It makes a huge difference. We're trying to get our numbers up so we could expand and, bring on additional freelancers, hopefully hire another reporter. It all costs money. And, we're not trying to pay people nothing. We want to pay people, decent because we should pay people decent. That's what progressives should do. So hopefully you could sign up if you haven't yet. For $5 a month, that's 16 cents a day. For those that can't afford it, totally understand. But if you can't afford it, consider contributing. Makes a big difference. So that's it, folks. We will have more weekends this weekend, including Steve Grumbine's show, Let's Get Ready to Grumble, which we air Sundays at 2 o'clock Eastern. That's 11 o'clock Pacific. So Steve's show will be on 2 o'clock Eastern this Sunday, 11 o'clock Pacific. If you've been watching Steve Grumbine's weekend shows, it's getting really, really rowdy. He's wearing wigs and doing 1980s grunge rocker impersonations. Pretty awesome. So that'll be on Sunday. We'll have some other interviews, including an interview I did in Philadelphia with a bar owner who's really struggling. That again is from our reporting trip. So we'll be airing that this weekend. So again, don't tune out. We'll have content this weekend. Thank you so much for watching. And again, please consider signing up as a Status Coup member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Have a great weekend.